June the 20th, 2014. It is what we call hereabouts West Virginia Day, because on June the 20th, 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the order creating the state of West Virginia. So note it. Pay attention to it. Remember it even. Because this is the anniversary of the creation of a state whose entire purpose was created out of conflict, and in which conflict of one sort or another has never ceased. This is West Virginia Day. West Virginia broke away from Virginia because this portion of the state of Virginia did not wish to commit treason. The rest of the Commonwealth of Virginia did. But the highland counties, the mountainous areas where slave owning was not nearly as prevalent, where the massive agriculture made possible by slavery didn't ever really take root because there wasn't that much land for doing it on. Well, folks over here were more interested in subsistence farming. That certainly is the history of my family. Farming for to raise enough to feed your family and hopefully a little bit extra to trade and barter with. Well, Bean noting in the chat room, I remember where I was last West Virginia Day. Weird, right? Whatever you're doing must be working, Bob. Thank you, Bean. Ooh. No, among other things, the Virginia Constitution prevented, it wasn't just that you had to be a property owner, you had to own a certain amount of property in order to be able to vote. And you also had to be male. Females need not apply. You had to be male and pale and property owning. And that didn't sit well with people in the highland counties of West Virginia. And it wasn't until like 1851 that the property ownership requirement was even done away with in Virginia. Even so, Virginia's never been particularly good at democracy, or even the half-hearted attempt at democracy that passes for democracy in the United States. Because, among other things, people in the western counties wanted direct election of governor, legislator, members of the Congress, things like that. So there was plenty to work with by the time the treason came around. When Robert E. Lee and all the other members of the Virginia government decided that they would violate the Constitution, that they would commit treason clearly enumerated in the Constitution, and and start a civil war. West Virginia largely didn't go with that. And so, beginning with the secession of Virginia from the United States, that act of treason, people in the western parts of the state, the Commonwealth of Old Virginia, said, "Screw that, we'll secede from you." And oddly enough, that did happen in a lot of places in the South. In the little county in Missouri where I started college, there was a secession movement. And they seceded from Missouri to become the Kingdom of Callaway. No, really. In Alabama, Winston County had no interest in committing treason against the United States government and formed the Free State of Winston. But only West Virginia became an entire state. Winston County went back into Alabama, Callaway County went back into Missouri. Only West Virginia and its constituent counties became an entire separate state. It is the only state ever to be forcefully carved out of another state. And so with the efforts that began in 1861, well, they culminated with the signature, with Abraham Lincoln's signature on the 20th of May, 1863, which stated that West Virginia would become a state 30 days following the execution of the law. Hence, June 20th. Now, And this has been a tormented place ever since. That is not to say it isn't beautiful. You heard both Jason and Alan, the trucker, last night talking about how beautiful, how gorgeous, how majestic it is to pass through here. And when you're not seeing what's being done to it, it is. I mean, breathtaking beauty. Not the soaring, craggy, snow-capped heights of the Rockies or the Andes or the Alps or the Himalayas beauty. I mean, that's just no. This is a lush green beauty of cool hollers and streams running and native brook trout swimming in those streams and in the little pools and eddies, or at least used to. Almost starting with the very inception of the state's abuse began. The state motto, by the way, is Montani Semper Liberi, which supposedly means Mountaineers are always free, although there's no verb in there. It's just Mountaineers or mountain people. Montani, people of the mountain, mountain people always free, which is more of an advertising slogan than it is an actual statement of fact. Devin noting, you can see stuff while driving here. All I get is a green tunnel. It's kind of the point, Devin. Because we've never been free. Now, by the time June 20th, 1863 rolled around, parts of my family had been here for over 100 years. And they had settled down, and they had gotten parcels of land and had begun farming them and raising animals and what have you. So, too, had a lot of other people. And the railroad companies and the timber companies and eventually the coal companies came in with something called a broad form deed that I encourage you to learn more about, and began systematically dispossessing the residents of this state and of central Appalachia generally of their lands. Because money. Yeah, Devin notes, and Devin's a West Virginian too. Devin notes, Montani Semper Liberi, free to die or leave. Maybe we ought to change the motto to Wild, Wonderful West Virginia. Y'all come back now and clean up your mess. Because they never do. The early history of West Virginia is a history of governors who are referred to as the bourbon governors, because they manifested that kind of an attitude. I don't mean like bourbon, but the bourbon kings of France, who considered the kingdom their personal property. So too with the early governors of this state. And they conceived a notion that this state could never survive without allowing itself to be brutally exploited. That we had to have the capital from places like Pittsburgh and Richmond and New York and Chicago and London in order to have anything here. Coal had already been discovered by the time statehood came along. So too had the salt sands. Oil and gas would be found in short order as well. And the long nightmare of misery and death would proceed. I mean, West Virginia was, West Virginia as a state was only 44 years old when the Monongah mine blew up in 1907, killing at least 500 men and little boys, and possibly many, many more, whose widows were kicked out onto the street, and eventually the coal company decided to pay each widow $75, and a coal executive, I've told this before, you may recall, said, and this was near Christmas, well, that ought to make a pretty nice Christmas for them ladies. Most of the widows and orphans were recently arrived from Italy, and most of the miners who died were Italian immigrants who knew less about mining coal than just about anything else on the planet, but had been more or less press-ganged into working in the coal industry. And it happened all over the state. So every June 20th, I spend some portion of the day in contemplation of what that means, Montani Semper Liberi, because there just hasn't been a hell of a lot of it for us to always be. My grandfather could not live in a house of his own choosing. He lived in the house he was told to live in by the coal company. He did not earn, he was not paid in legal tender American money. He was paid in coal company scrip. He could not shop wherever he wished to shop. He had to shop at the coal company store or else be fired. And when you shop at the coal company store, you pay wildly inflated prices so that the coal company never actually winds up paying any money to its workers and instead pockets it all. So too his father-in-law, my great-grandfather. It was a form of wage slavery. Freedom of speech did not obtain in the coal camps. You couldn't just talk to anybody about anything, or you would be put out into the streets. No matter the time of year, no matter the weather. Like I said, not a lot of that freedom to always be rolling around. We have been free to march off to a nation's wars. Since its creation, the state of West Virginia has given more on a per capita basis to the American military of all forms than any other state in the Union. We do love us a good fight. And it is said we are pretty good shots. There are Congressional Medal of Honor winners from West Virginia. There have been generals, admirals, and a whole lot of cannon fodder. Some freedom, huh? We have been blown up, gassed, burnt, crushed, dusted. Not a lot of freedom in the Hawk's Nest Tunnel created by Union Carbide Corporation, where thousands died of a brand new disease we had never heard of before called occupational pneumoconiosis. Oh, us hillbillies have gotten to learn some fancy words over the years. Occupational pneumoconiosis. That's what happens when you breathe lots of silica sand dust, and eventually in the wet environs of the lungs, it begins to turn to concrete. And you die gasping. Horribly. Learned that the hard way with the Hawk's Nest Tunnel disaster, the worst industrial disaster in the history of the world, until Union Carbide decided to outdo itself and took its show on the road to a little hamlet called Bhopal, India. Some freedom. Much more of that freedom, and there won't be many more of us left. We have been free to have our loved ones washed down hollers by a raging wall of toxic waste, to see our kith and kin hanging in trees after a flood caused by a coal company. We have been free for coal company executives to incinerate us alive past the point of being able to recognize the incinerated as human beings. We have been free to breathe the dust that boils down after explosions on mountaintop removal sites and unleashes into our bodies ultrafine particles that act as absolute demolition engines on a cellular level in our bodies. We've been free to have our garden soils poisoned, our water poisoned, our air poisoned. We have been free to attend funeral after funeral after funeral and scratch our little heads and I wonder why everybody up this holler is so sick. And free to watch in amazed wonder as our elected representatives say, well, every day somebody else says something makes you sick. Yeah, Stockton Larry in the chat room making an observation. West Virginia target identification is sadly lacking. It's as if the Mountaineers don't know who the real enemy is. That is, them that's trying to kill you. They're not trying. They're succeeding. And they're not real picky about who they kill. They might kill a housewife in the holler who goes out every day and takes care of her cats and dogs and waters the flowers and basks in the luxury in the seeming luxury of listening to the creek run by her house. All the while she's breathing coal company profit-based poisons. Or they might just maybe kill an infant in the womb who won't be able to breathe properly when she comes into the world because ultrafine particles easily transit the placental barrier and baby is in the womb struggling to survive and enters life gasping. We are, of course, free to have the water supply, the fresh water supply of 300,000 human beings poisoned because nobody much gave any thought to the fact that there was tens of thousands of gallons of said poison sitting right next to the river. And nobody gives much thought to the fact that there are probably lots of other similarly situated tanks full of poison. We are free to have the water that comes out of our wells and out of our faucets. We are free to have it run blood red and have it stink of death itself. We are free. Always free. We are free to sacrifice 4,000 people in the way of excess deaths every year in this state so that 4,000 people can have a job and co. And we are free to listen to those coal people piss and moan if we dare speak up and object. We're free. Much more of this freedom, and we'll be in a hard way. Much more of this freedom, and all our problems will be over. We'll finally get some rest of the eternal type. Yeah. So, just take a minute this 20th day of June 2014 to think kindly upon the people of West Virginia. Take a moment to even maybe be thankful to them in the sacrifices that have been foisted upon them over the last 151 years. Because whether we wanted to or not, we have bled and died and sacrificed for the greater good of this nation, the greater good of corporate profits, the greater good of foreign banks, the greater good of people who will never set foot in this state, and yet have dragged the money out of this state in bushel barrels. And not even so much as a pat on the head or a thank you. Just when you think of us, think kindly. The next time you see some hillbilly joke in print or on the internet or on TV, take just a moment and think, wait a minute, is it really nice to talk that way about people who have sacrificed their very beings for the greater good of the country? Thanks. We do appreciate it. Yeah, Devin, hills of death. And we are, as Devin notes, indeed a corporate colony. Always have been. And unless something changes rather dramatically, always will be. Most of this state is owned by out-of-state interests. The very land of this state, I mean. I may live on this little acre of ground, but a coal company could come in tomorrow, if they already haven't undermined it, and utterly destroy it, because they own the minerals. We once had a beautiful, crystal clear well drilled about 72 feet deep, and it yielded up water that was breathtakingly cold and just as crisp as could be. Then in the mid-'80s, they strip-mined out the road here, and now it has a red slime in it, and we don't dare consume it. We don't dare even bathe in it. We damn sure don't cook with it. Some freedom. We moved here to this property in 1999. At that point in time, my eldest daughter was 11. The next one along was 5. The next one, my son, Ferg, was basically 3. And his baby sister, Doodle, was 2. By the time Doodle and Margie had reached 15 years of age, they each had to go to the hospital and have their gallbladders removed, because their gallbladders had become poisonous. Ferg was born with a respiratory birth defect, and our eldest is cursed, plagued by a thyroid gone horribly, horribly wrong. All of these things are at least partially attributable to the air that they breathed when we chose to come over here, because it would be, well, because it was heritage, because this is where my family comes from. This is ancestral country. My multi-great-grandfather owned every piece of ground between the New River, or not the New River, between the Meadow River and the Greenbrier River at one point in time. He stole it fair and square from the people who had been living here for the last 10,000 years. And so most people around here, when they do their title search, will eventually, if they go all the way back, they'll find themselves coming out of a grant or a sale of a parcel of land or a gift of a parcel of land out of my multi-great-grandfather's holdings. And his multi-great-granddaughters were poisoned because the profit-driven coal industry felt a burning need to blow up the mountain that has stood sentinel over this community for as long as this community has existed. A burning need to blow up the mountain that has guarded this vale from wind, tornadoes, which has stood over this little community and this little plateau area for countless millions of years. And then one day, they just blew it up. And it's not just my daughters with the gallbladder stuff. Kids are almost routinely having them removed now because they go bad so early. Yeah. Wonder why. So just a few reflections, and yeah, we'll get into the regular newsy kind of stuff in short order. But some reflections on what it means when West Virginia Day rolls around. How it feels to be the single most abused, subjected, put upon state in the Union. The sense of rage one feels when one finds out that one's junior senator has co-authored a bill with Mary Landrieu of Louisiana making a ceremonial pronouncement in favor of the Keystone XL pipeline, which doesn't have a God-blessed thing to do with West Virginia or Louisiana. What a slap in the face that Senator Joe Manchin could waste his time on mendacious hooey and yet will not acknowledge in public or private that there is a booming health crisis in his own state among his own constituents because he does not give a tinker's damn. What an enduring shame that man is on the people of this state and the generations that went before them, that sacrificed and died and starved and froze and burned and were burdened under the weight of slate falls miles underground. What an undying shame he is to all of that. You probably didn't want to hear 37 minutes of me waxing frustrated. Oh, but God, the beauty of this state is almost unexpressible. Driving the little two-lane roads that wind through the hills, something calls out to you where you just want to pull the car over and hike up into them just to see what's there, just to get into the quiet and let nature fill in around you, to hear the singing of the birds, to feel the temperature change in a second by 5, 10, 15 degrees, from blazing heat to calming cool, to hear things making noises in the woods and the things that you can't see, you can only hear where they are, to begin to train your vision on distant flecks of movement. Oh, the magnificence, the beauty. Oh, the hills, the beautiful hills. How I love those West Virginia hills. If over land or sea I roam, still I think of happy home and my friends among those West Virginia hills. Let's take a break. This is listener-supported conversation radio. This is The Horn. I'm Bob Kincaid.